Hi, I'm Mark Brown and this is Game Maker's Toolkit, a YouTube series about game design. A few weeks ago, I had the pleasure of speaking to Evan Hill, a former level designer at Naughty Dog who worked on one of my favourite parts of The Last of Us Part 2. Evan was responsible for a level called The Birthday Gift, a level about Joel and Ellie's relationship that takes place in a nostalgic flashback set between the events of the two games.
Happy birthday, kiddo.
So, I set up a three-way Discord chat with me, Evan, and a mirror of my PS4 output, so he could provide commentary on his level as I played through it. And you know what? The conversation was so interesting that I couldn't think of a better way to do it justice than to simply share a heavily edited version of our chat. So, without further ado, let's just jump on in and find out how a level like this gets made. So how does a level like this begin? Are you given a brief from Neil about what the level should be like and what it should contain?
So for this sequence and a lot of sequences, all I got from Neil was 2 paragraphs. Like we had this big Excel spreadsheet of, the game in its totality, what we needed, and there were like 2 cells dedicated to the museum of we show that Joel taught Ellie to swim, and we have a thing in the museum where they confront each other about the fireflies. That was basically it. And then from there, they just kind of said, go.
And so then are you drawing maps and sketches, or do you just go straight into the level creation tools?
I tend to go straight into block mesh. Most people in Naughty Dog tend to as well. One of the kind of truisms is that you only know if it works if it's in 3D. The simplest and quickest way is to just jump into the closest version to the final game.
And then in this block mesh, do you have it so you can control Ellie with the PlayStation 4 controller and the same camera and things like that?
Exactly. Same camera, same animations. Getting the exact camera proportions, getting the exact character controller in there is the big reason we do it like that. Where you're just able to get a sense of what it plays like.
So the level begins in this outdoor, very open area. How do you funnel the player in and deal with tricky issues like draw distance?
Honestly, it's a massive pain. As you can kind of see here, the trick is to try and give this sense of boundlessness, while always still kind of producing natural barriers where it's even if you were to jump in the water, you get a feeling I'm not going to climb over all of that and crest that hill. But I guess, the big takeaway answer is a lot of smoke and mirrors, a wonderful art team that knows to kind of work within those constraints.
So the next part is kind of a tutorial, because I think this is the first time we've seen Ellie swimming, right?
Yes. First time that Ellie has on-screen swam. Initially it was going to be an actual swimming lesson, but we kind of, as we iterated on it, figured no, this could actually be a turn or a reveal where it's they've already done that. We've already accomplished this moment, and it gives Joel this really wonderfully dad-like tease with her.
Then we get to this fun reversal where Ellie pushes Joel in the water.
I think for a while it wasn't even a reversal. It was just okay, hop in, all these other things. And for a while after that, it was also just going to be a cutscene. And I actually kind of had to personally harass Neil a little bit to just be can we keep the button in? And I think it adds a lot of value. Just being able to be the motivator for this little small turnaround really adds a lot.
One of the things Naughty Dog is known for is guiding the player with things like weenies and colour and lighting. Are you still using those techniques on a more exploratory level like this one?
Oh, I mean, the whole bucket is still getting thrown in everything all the time. I think the biggest one that's most prominent, obviously, is Joel kind of leading you through the initial section of the level. So it's he's just this constant sign, basically, just go here, follow me. But then we flip it, even right here, where he actually stops and lets you push forward into the brush. You kind of start looking towards the light. Because he's now at this point in the narrative just kind of going all right, cool, I'm gonna let her wander into this. I'm gonna stop leading, and he even shuts up and she's what is it?
Oh my god, it is a dinosaur!
Here, even on the dinosaur, we try to use ivy and color. If you look at the tail, it's a brighter hue just to try and draw your eye and give you a sense that it's hey, this is secretly climbable. Hey, you can do this. And again, Joel is leading you around this, so we're always kind of at least hinting at the possibilities rather than like leading you directly.
Climbing the dinosaur is definitely one of these fantastic moments in the level. How do these moments come about?
Basically, a lot of this came out in the walkthroughs. So I would do a layout, and then we would actually sit down with Neil and play through it on the stick and kind of like improv the characters. And actually like from that like improv, a lot of the kind of memorable moments kind of unfolded themselves. Like I had a really derpy version of the dinosaur. I mean, like really awful. Like even just seeing that, Neil's first question when he looked at it was like, "Can I climb it?" Let's see. And we're like, yeah, okay, let's do that. Let's.
When the player tries something like climbing the dinosaur, there's usually a funny or cute voice line in response. So what comes first, the dialogue or the level design?
Like a lot of these like wonderful lines were actually done kind of later in the process, where like Hallie and Neil would just kind of come through, work with us on the level and scripting team, and just kind of figure out what would sell the moment best. And I think that's why everything feels so like interlaced and grounded, is because a lot of the dialogue is actually written in reaction to the art. The level designers like will make something for navigation or some other purpose, and then the writers go in and fill out naturally with how the character's voice would describe that.
So tell me a bit about this introductory area in the museum.
So for this part, we wanted to just kind of give a bit more of a neutral opening. So it's like, this is one of those examples where we actually turn down a lot of those navigational techniques a little bit, so that you don't feel like you're being railroaded or that there's some kind of golden path, but instead you're engaging with the space directly. You're the one kind of actively like trying to piece together and figure out what the space is.
So there's lots of things we can interact with in this part of the museum, but many of those interactions are really short. Was that intentional?
Exactly. Because we're letting the player drive the pacing of this sequence, we kind of wanted to keep each individual chunk as small and kind of responsive as possible. So they're quippy, they're punchy, and it just gives you this, the sense that it's like, well, if you want more, you can turn another page. So I think like the early area definitely like primes you that it's like every little thing will be worth fiddling or touching if you want to.
There's a really nice example here of using the wall to reveal the upcoming dinosaurs. How do you create things like that?
Yeah, the main thing we just kind of look at is, you said, just trying to create interesting camera movements with the level geometry. So like always ensuring that like occluder, as you saw with the wall there, is like sliding off. And that's the thing that starts revealing all of these interesting things rather than like all there on display at one moment. The way we kind of refine these things, it varies. So like for the T-Rex, for example, there were some instances where like you'd be able to see the T-Rex a little too early or a little too soon. So like trying to actually like sculpt the doorway with the foliage so that when Ellie sees it and reacts is when you see it and react.
There's a lot of stuff in this level that players can interact with, but they can also skip a whole bunch of it. How do you feel about players not seeing some of the content that you made?
The main thing we were focusing on was just like this sense of confidence that it's like, it's okay if there isn't this like perfect singular experience of this level. Like a big part of it is this sense of freedom and the sense that you're the one driving this forward. And sometimes the result of that is just like letting you be able to miss things, letting you not see every nook and cranny. Because the main thing was, it's like if you forced everyone to do everything, for some people it would drag. You want to be able to like let the player go through as quickly or slowly as possible. And for the people that just want to run through, asking them to sit there and go through all these little cute things would have absolutely infuriated them.
As we move into this second part of the museum, which is the space area, I was curious how much you're thinking ahead when you're doing the block mesh versus just putting down indescript random blobs.
For this level, it was a good, healthy mix of just putting blobs in. Like the early block mesh really was just trying to figure out the density of the space. So like we would kind of riff with Neil more, where it's like I just kind of had this default literal like blob thing where it's like I would just put this as like, okay, cool, here's a point of interest, here's a point of interest, here's a point of interest. And then from there, we just kept iterating. Like this space area had like, I think 3 or 4 full revisions. After we got the pacing down, I think it was really kind of like the art team kept coming up with really interesting ideas, and then we kind of came up with this final version.
I just noticed as I got off the lunar rover there, the camera swung around really nicely to frame the capsule. Is that a case of leading the player to the next part of the level?
Absolutely. So it's just like finding little opportunities like that anytime you place something down in the level where it's like, all right, how do I get them to think about the next thing? How do I get them to, frame or otherwise reference it? Sometimes it's in the writing, sometimes it's in like the camera controls, but yeah, overall, I think like by this point though, thankfully, like a lot of the players are just kind of bought in to like how this space works. They're just like, okay, cool.
So the space capsule is obviously this huge, important part of the museum. How did that come about?
Actually, the sequence in its very, very early stages was going to end here. Like it was just going to have Firefly graffiti, and it was just going to be, the big punch, and that's it. But as we kept digging into the minds of the characters, in the pitches with Neil and the other writers, like we just kept wanting to deliver more. We kept wanting to fully articulate in this moment in Ellie's life, where she's actually, feeling herself, feeling unburdened and unhindered. From there, I actually then started revising the level as is to kind of lead up to this moment, to give it more space to breathe, and to kind of, before like the dinosaur was kind of the high point, but now with this, it's just a part of the build towards this sequence.
And then with this as the high point, we drop down into a very different tone for the next section, which is dark and spooky and has the confrontation in the relationship. It's almost like the level is built on a 3-act arc.
Exactly. Like, okay, cool. Now that we know we want to deliver to this moment, how do we pace it out? How do we actually build out the structure properly? And then now that we have this extreme high note, like what do we do to counterbalance it? How do we develop it? What's the third act after this,
Before we get to that, though, we have to jump off of this cafe and down into the water. Is that a loading gate where you're unloading previous parts of the level to free up memory? How does that work?
We definitely have loading gates. It's just that there was never a point where we looked at the budget and said, like, we ran out of memory here, so we need to put this in now. Instead, it's more of just kind of like this natural assumption that's like, we're going to want to give them a break. We're going to want to give us some load time and some load pacing. And so let's find out where that'll fit narratively. So after the capsule, like we can kind of take that down beat. So let's make it a traversal beat, lets us unload and do these other things. So the next thing that we do narratively can have the full bandwidth to do it at once.
So Joel and Ellie have now split up and the level takes on a very different tone. Could you talk to me about this part of the level?
I think we just wanted like emotional variety was the initial impetus. And then we also kind of wanted to, as we just kept exploring it deeper, we wanted it to kind of lead into the conflicts in the relationship that have been kind of peppered throughout the game so far. That it's like, cool, they had this amazing, wonderful experience. Like everything up until this point was like the perfect version of the relationship. And then, okay, cool, there's like a dark side to this museum. There's a dark side to Ellie and Joel's relationship. There's an undercurrent. There's something that's still kind of gnawing at them. And then like right now it's vague. It's just like, oh, there's all this ominous graffiti. There's somebody who's kind of very regretful of the decisions they've made in life, the violence they've enacted. The emotional weight of the actions I've been doing up until this point kind of got to somebody.
And the feeling of unease is emphasized by the fact that it feels like there's going to be a fight here, but there's actually no enemies whatsoever.
Just to even signal that it's a possibility is enough to get people to tense up. We're giving fake pickups, all these other things. Like there's no combat in here, but just the fact that everything in here is like 2 combat metrics, quiet. This whole sequence is there. This is kind of talking about to kind of explore and set up that tension that this relationship between Ellie and Joel has conflicts and defects that can't be ignored, that, will run you over. This helps us tie the good to the bad.
I'm in here!
This level obviously fits in between 2 other levels, one before and one after. How do you maintain a consistent flow across the whole game?
So it's just like a matter of like kind of knowing who is in charge of each section, always kind of keeping abreast of like what their needs and their goals were. To start out, it was really just like knowing it's like, oh, cool, this underground subway thing, this is going to be really, really, really intense. We're going to make this the big contrast point for this part of the game. Same with the sequence after, where it's like knowing that we're going into the sequence of Rescue Jesse, we're introducing like dogs for the first time, and all these other elements. So that's when we kind of started tooling with the like boar jump scare to kind of tune the player and like, okay, cool, we're going back now. The fun times are over. This is now going to get back to serious territory. Brace yourself.
So if it's even possible to quantify, how long do you think this level took to make?
Pretty much 2 solid years.
Really?
Really. Like, big secret for all of Naughty Dog level design is just iteration and work. There's, we have a lot of fundamentals, but there are some sequences in this game that were redone like 25 times. And just the big secret for this level of quality is just that dedication, that level of work that we'll be willing to do to scrap something that doesn't work and redo it. But yeah, to get this to this final version, it was 2 solid years, and my responsibility shifted pretty dramatically over that time. So like initially it's just a block out, it's just a layout, kind of working with the narrative design. But then like as things get more and more concrete, my role shifts more and more into being producer.
And that's the thing. While Evan was the level designer, working under direction from the game's directors and lead designers, there was a whole team of people working with him on this area. Evan's simple block mesh was turned into fabulous 3D models by David Baldwin and Sarah Swenson, which were then textured by Brian Beppu and lit by Scott Greenway. And that's all going off ideas from concept artists. There were also people involved in adding effects, creating Ellie's animations, and scripting Joel's movements. And even more people were responsible for producing the level's cinematic moments. But what's bonkers is that each person may only work on a handful of areas in this massive game. For example, Evan made the museum, Ellie's second flashback, the section at the Winter Lodge, and a part with Abby and Owen. And that's it. Other designers were able to focus on the game's many other areas, which all makes it a bit tricky for me to glamorize a The Last of Us level on this channel. This sort of intricately handcrafted process is just not financially feasible for many companies outside of a rarefied few like Rockstar and Naughty Dog. And judging by insider reports, it might not even have been particularly feasible for Naughty Dog itself, or Rockstar for that matter. So as amazing as the final product is, it must come with the caveat that a lot of studios simply don't have the resources to produce something like this in a 30-hour game filled with levels made to an equally high level of quality. With that being said, the museum is packed with level design lessons that are applicable to games of any scale. Improving as the characters to find moments that fit their personality, having the confidence to let players miss things, using art and geometry to guide the player's eye and frame the best moments, and having the feel of the level mimic the emotional journey of the character's relationship. Amazing stuff all the way through. No wonder it's one of the best levels in the whole game. Thanks for watching. I want to give a huge thank you to Evan for talking to me. As always, the full hour-long conversation is available to GMTK patrons on the $5 tier. Also, thanks go to the level's environment artist Sarah, who also chatted to me to help fill in some extra details. In case it needs to be said, this video is not in any way sponsored by PlayStation or Naughty Dog. I know this sort of insider access can sometimes be misconstrued as marketing for the game, but that's not the case. I'm just a fan. Cheers to all GMTK patrons for funding this sort of content. You're amazing.